Our scripture reading this morning is a little bit longer. The story in the text spans 2 chapters, and so we'll be reading the entirety of these 2 chapters. They're shorter chapters, but we might go a little long. We already called Eaton Park and reserved your spot. Just kidding. We'll be in good shape. I didn't want anybody to be concerned when they saw how lengthy the text was today. Here at Leesburg, we, for the most part, will go through sections of the Bible, verse by verse and chapter by chapter. And sometimes when we do that, the story is uncomfortable. The story today involves the slaughter of innocent people. And I don't like it when the Bible has those kind of stories. You know, there's enough of that nonsense in the world today, but yet we're left to kind of grapple with that. So here's the text from 1 Samuel. As we are looking at the outlaw years of David's life, 1 Samuel 21 and 22. Now David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said to him, "Why are you alone, and no one is with you?" So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business, and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you, or what I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found.' The priest answered David and said, 'There is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread if the young men have at least kept themselves from women.' And David answered the priest and said, 'Truly women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread in effect is common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day.' So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, which had been taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, 'Is not there here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's command required haste.' So the priest said, 'The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you take that, take it, for there is no other except that one here.' And David said, 'There is none like it, give it to me.' Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul, and he went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Now David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them, pretended madness in their hands, scratched at the doors of the gates, and left his saliva fall down his beard. And Achish said to his servants, 'Look, you see this man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen that you have brought this fellow to play the madmen in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?' David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became the captain over them. And there were about 400 men with him. Then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, 'Please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me.' So he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now the prophet Gad said to David, 'Do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go to the land of Judah.' So David departed and went to the forest of Hereth. When Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, now Saul was staying at Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah with his spear in his hand, and all his servants standing about him. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, you Benjamites. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with this son of Jesse. There is not one of you who is sorry for me or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as it is this day." Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, "I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." So the king called Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all of his father's house, the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as it is this day?" So Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And who among all your servants is as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes out at your bidding and is honorable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to any in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of this matter, little or much." And the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." And the king said to the guards who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priest of the Lord, because their hand is also with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell me." But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priest of the Lord. And the king said to Doeg, "You turn and kill the priest." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priest, and killed on that day 85 men who wore the linen ephod. Also at Nob, the city of the priest, and struck with the edge of the sword men and women and children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys and sheep with the edge of the sword. Now one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. So David said to Abiathar, "I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul. I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, but with me you shall be safe." This is the word of the Lord. Well, David is the anointed outlaw. And I have to think that he probably didn't think it was going to unfold the way it was unfolding. Usually when you were anointed to be the next king, you got some special training on how to be the next king. They took you to a school and had tutors teach you different languages and all of the etiquette of the court. David didn't have any of that. In fact, the arc of his life kind of goes up and down. First, he's anointed by Samuel. Then he kills Goliath. And that was kind of the high point of his life when he was about 17 years old. Then for 17 years, he runs around as an outlaw, being chased constantly by Saul, being persecuted. Stories like this just repeat themselves over and over and over again till the end of this book, 1 Samuel. Then it gets a little better when Saul finally is killed by an enemy army and he becomes the king. But then David, his own life kind of falls apart with his own sin and his family turmoil. And then he kind of has the final years of a king where it kind of levels out just barely above where he was as a shepherd. It didn't play out the way that he probably thought that day when he was a little lad and was called in by Samuel out from the fields, and they poured the oil over his head and said, "You're going to be the next king." And maybe after he killed Goliath, and he thought, this is going to be the fast track. Like, I'm going to be king pretty soon, and it's going to be a pretty easy road. And Saul actually invited him into his house and then gave him his daughter to marry. And it looked like it was all going to go according to maybe the script that he had in his mind. And then it just went crazy to the point of where we are today. So let's more briefly break down the text over the next few moments. The first part of the 2 chapters that we just read is David is actually guilty of telling a lie, isn't he? He says some things that aren't true to the priest when he is running. He's running from Saul. That's the reason he's by himself. Jonathan has shot those arrows out in the field to warn him, hey, you've got to go for a run because my dad's going to try to kill you. And so David flees. And he just happens to come to this place called Nob. It's not far from where Samuel lived in Ramah. Excuse me. And he comes to Ahimelech the priest. And notice, excuse me. Sorry. Okay, we're good. Now David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said, why are you alone and no one is with you? Now, what could David have done here? He could have simply told Ahimelech the truth. And then there's some question, why didn't he just tell him the truth? There could be a couple reasons. One reason is he's afraid that Ahimelech will tell Saul. Or the other thing is he could be trying to protect Ahimelech and give Ahimelech plausible deniability, which let's just say that that's what he's doing here. He makes all this big story. The king has ordered me on this urgent business, and he keeps making it up as he goes. Yeah, all of my guys, nobody's been with a woman, and like all this planning, and it's been 3 days, and it's like, I think that the priest is like, really? That sounds like a really weird way to start a mission. But he just keeps diving, and he needs food for his journey. The only food that the priest has available are those loaves of bread that would be put on at the showbread, which would be put by the tabernacle, by the ark. And so they have just taken the old loaves off, which are normally given to the priest then, and they've put the new loaves on. So Ahimelech is going to go without food for a while so that David can have some food. But he's kind of made up this story. The problem is it does leave Ahimelech a little bit in the dark. And if Ahimelech would have known, then he might have been a little bit more aware of how to approach Saul when he came back to Saul. And you can tell it bothers David by how David responded at the end of the story. But because of his fear, he speaks a falsehood. He could have been truthful and just not said some things. But he made some stuff up that just wasn't true. He ends up with Goliath's sword. And then off he goes to the Philistines. So he gets the bread, he gets the sword, but before he leaves, he notices this guy Doeg. And he's going to come back in the story. Doeg is an Edomite, so that means he's from the country of Edom. Saul had already conquered that country. Back in chapter 14-ish, when Saul was conquering, Edom was one of the nations who had been conquered. And this guy, Doeg, was probably a ranking official or something, and Saul has brought him in, but he's in charge of the herds and the flocks, and he's maybe looking for something a little bit more important to do. And he's looking for an opportunity. And David takes note. David knows who he is because David's in Saul's inner circle, and David doesn't trust Doeg, but he doesn't say anything. He gets the bread, he gets the sword, and he leaves. Well, then he goes to Achish. We're on probably a couple slides down then. Skip ahead to where David goes to, one more. Yeah. David arose and fled that day and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Now, what do we know about Gath in this story so far? Gath is a Philistine city. Who is from Gath? Goliath. David's got Goliath's sword, and he comes to the city of Gath thinking that maybe he can find refuge there. Maybe there can be some kind of a deal, because now the king of Gath and David both have a common enemy in King Saul. And so David's maybe thinking, I can make an alliance. They'll give me some protection. He's got Goliath's sword. I mean, everybody's going to know who he is. But they already heard the song on the radio in Gath. Did you catch that? Did they not sing of him? Saul his thousands, David his 10,000s. And so David realizes this was probably a bad strategy. And again, he's having to make it up as he goes. He didn't start off that morning wanting to be an outlaw. So he's lied to a priest, and now he comes to Gath. It would have taken a few days to get from Nob over to Gath. And his strategy's not working out. So now he has to start acting like a crazy man. Like, maybe if I act like a crazy man, they'll just let me go. And that's what happens. That kind of plays out. It says in verse 24, David took the words to heart. In other words, he realizes they're probably not going to welcome me since I killed Goliath. So he changed his behavior. He pretended madness. He's scratching. He's foaming at the mouth. And I love how the king of Gath, in some other translations, he says, don't we have enough crazy people here? You're really bringing me another crazy person? And so the king of Gath is kind of upset with his counselors for even bringing David in. Shall this fellow come into my house? No. And it was common back then to, if you made an alliance with an enemy, you bring them in and treat them well. And that wasn't going to work. So now David has to flee again. And he flees. But before he does that, it's kind of interesting. David, therefore, departed, and he starts gaining a following. He departed from there, and he escaped to the cave at Adullam. His brother and all his father's house heard it. They went down there, because they probably have a price on their heads too. It's a bad time for David's family. But look who else starts showing up. Anyone who was in distress, anybody who was in debt, anybody who was discontented. I mean, this is a real, give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses. Like, everybody who has a problem starts showing up. And David became the captain over them. And there ended up being about 400. Now David has the responsibility, whether he wanted it or not, for these 400 people. Can you imagine trying to feed 400 people? Every day, a couple meals a day. That's a lot of resources. And that's just the men. There's other people that are along with them, families and so forth. So David gets his own family out of there by going to Moab. Now, this is interesting. Who was the last person in the biblical narrative who took his family to sojourn in Moab? Does anybody remember who the last person in the biblical narrative to do this was? It was Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, in the book of Ruth, right? Elimelech left Bethlehem to go, during a famine, to go to Moab for a brief time for protection. Elimelech died. His two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, died. Naomi, Elimelech's wife and daughter-in-law, who is Moabite, Ruth, comes back to Bethlehem. Ruth marries a guy named Boaz, and they have a son whose name is Obed. Obed has a son whose name is Jesse, and Jesse has a son whose name is... You see the connection here with Moab. He's got some kinfolk there. Be like me going back to West Virginia. Okay? He's got some kinfolk, and so he goes to Moab, and he arranges that they will be protected while they're there, because they can't stay with him. And he can't be sort of burdened with trying to care for family while he's also trying to run from Saul and keep track of these 400 warriors that are with him. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me. So he brought them before the king of Moab. They dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now, unlike Elimelech, David does not get to stay in Moab. Because the prophet comes and says, don't stay here. Do not stay here. Depart and go back to the land of Judah. So David departed and went to the forest of Hereth. Now we see the extent, as we read in the text, of Saul's madness. When Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, and then there's this little parenthesis in the verse, Saul was staying there under this tree at Ramah. What does he always have in his hand? Have you been noticing that as we've read through it? Almost every time it says Saul, it says with a spear in his hand. This is a guy who is completely paranoid. He's carrying at all times, all right? He's afraid somebody's going to try to kill them, and he always has a spear in his hand. It's a symbol of his authority. It's a symbol of his power, and he will throw a spear. He threw it at David. He threw a spear at Jonathan, his own son. He's a dangerous person, and he wants everybody to kind of know he's a dangerous person because his weapon is right there. Saul said to the servants, "Hear now, you Benjamites." Saul is of the tribe of Benjamin. And what he's trying to play on his family loyalties, his clan loyalties. I'll give you positions of power, captains of 50s, captains of 1,000s. I'll give you lands. Do you think David's going to do that for you? What's he saying? If I am removed as king, David will exalt his own family. They'll take all of your stuff, so you guys better stick with me. He's basically making a veiled threat. You're going to lose your livelihoods if David becomes king. Will this son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you captains of thousands, captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me. There is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me. Yeah, because you're a jerk. And you're trying to kill an innocent man, and you're causing all kinds of problems. Of course nobody feels sorry for you. But he's so self-centered and so insecure. Probably, if they had psychiatrists and psychologists and everything back then, they would have said, textbook narcissist. Right? There's nobody who's sorry for me. Or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against him. He's still blaming Jonathan for all of this. To lie in wait as it is this day. Why does he have a spear in his hand? Because he's afraid that behind every bush, David is waiting to attack him. Now we come to Doeg. Doeg sees an opportunity here. This is a chance. Saul's pretty desperate. I can maybe move up the ladder a few pegs. I can jump over some other people. He's got some information. I saw the son of Jesse go to Nom, Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. He inquired of the Lord. Gave him provisions, gave him the sword. So then the king calls for Ahimelech. And of course, Ahimelech has no clue over these next few verses. No idea that there is even an issue between David and Saul. There wouldn't have been any reason for him to know that. As far as he knows, and everybody else knows, except for Saul's inner circle, David's a great guy. He's Saul's son-in-law. Every time Saul sends David out for battle, what happens? They win the battle. David is making Saul's life easier. That's what everybody in the kingdom thinks, except for the inner circle who really know Saul's craziness. So he called them and he answered, "Here I am, my lord." And Saul said, "Why have you conspired against me?" Do you see this trend? Everybody is conspiring against. Boy, there's a little bit of this going on in our world today. It's all about me, and anything that's not about me is a conspiracy against me. Some of you work with people like this. They're in your neighborhood, maybe in your family. Everything here, it's about me. Why have you conspired against me? You and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword? You've inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me? In other words, were you praying that David would come against me? Are you blessing him in his journey? Ahimelech says, who's greater than David? He's your own son-in-law. He says, did I then begin to inquire of the Lord? I've been praying for David all the time. He's one of your greatest warriors. I didn't just start praying for David when he stopped by and asked for bread and a sword. I've been praying for him all along. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to any of his house. Your servant knew nothing of this, little or much. And then he gets the death penalty. You will die, Ahimelech, you and your father's house. Now there is a little history here. Ahimelech is a descendant of one of the two sons of Eli the priest, Hophni and Phinehas. And it was prophesied that their reign as priest would end. And it's possible that Saul knows that, and so he's bringing an end to the reign of the descendants of Eli the priest. But he tells his men to do it, and they won't do it. There's some bravery here among these servants of Saul. This is his inner circle, his warriors, his bodyguard, if you will. They're all standing around and they're like, we're not killing the priest. That's just not going to happen. That's astonishing bravery for those men to band together against the king. But then the king says to Doeg, you do it. And Doeg has already kind of tried to work his way in to the king's good graces by giving this information. And now he is given this terrible task, and he performs it by slaying everyone. It's interesting, if you remember, earlier in Saul's reign, he had spared the life of the king that he was supposed to kill. Remember when Saul was supposed to wipe out this whole city, and he kept the king alive, and he kept all the best animals alive? And why? Because he thought, this is good for me. I'll keep all this stuff. But now, when it's somebody against him, what does he do? He wipes out everybody. I mean, he killed this guy's animals. He killed everything. All the people, the animals, everything. Just wiped it all out. Now David then has regret. And I think some of that's understandable. Now one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul. Have you ever had one of those moments or multiple moments like that in life where you replayed the tape over and over again and you thought, I should have, if I would have done that different than this, all of these other things? And this is that moment for David. He saw it, he made a mental note of it back when it happened, and he knew it, and sure enough. Then he says this, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Is that true? No. That's not true. Saul's madness, Saul's insecurity, Saul's sinfulness, and Doeg's complicitness is what killed the people in this house. So David takes some ownership here that maybe is not really due. I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, though, and do not fear, for the one who seeks my life seeks yours, but with me you will be safe. And Abiathar does stay with David, and he's with him for his entire reign. The interesting little note, way at the end of the story, you got to get into 2 Samuel, you got to get into 1 Kings. When David's about ready to die, and he has two sons, Adonijah and Solomon, David has sided with Solomon. He's going to give Solomon the kingship. Abiathar actually sides with Adonijah, and right at the end of David's life betrays his lifelong friend. It's an odd twist at the end of the story. Well, what can we take away from 1 Samuel chapter 21 and 22? The first thing is this. I got about 5. David's fear caused him to speak deceitfully and to act foolishly. And I think there's a lesson in that for every one of us. Fear can cause us to, in a moment of panic, say things that really aren't true or embellish, or be careful. Be careful in responding out of fear, because it's easy when we're afraid to speak deceitfully. to say things that don't need to be said, to try to add just a little bit to appease our own insecurity. So he speaks deceitfully. He also acts foolishly, and fear will cause us to act foolishly. Now, we may not be like David, clawing at the doors and, slobbering down our beards, but he acts foolishly out of fear. So be careful. Fear, the scripture says, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And if we have a sound mind and we're in God's power, we're not going to speak deceitfully and we're not going to act foolishly. David's fear caused him to speak deceitfully, caused him to act foolishly. I think there's a caution in that for us. Secondly, David's followers were loyal because of identity. And over time, they went from being this rabble of people who didn't pay their debts and people who were discontents. They became the mighty men. You read a couple chapters later, might even be the next chapter, starts talking about David's mighty men and all these great things that they did. Well, why did they gather around David in the first place? He was somebody they could identify with. Somebody who was being persecuted and cast out, and they felt persecuted and they felt cast out. I think there's an important thing here in discipleship. If we will identify with people where they are, and people can identify with us as people who are on a journey rather than people who have reached a destination, people are more likely to band with us and walk with us. So Jesus' disciples didn't have it all figured out. They weren't super Christians the day that Jesus ascended to heaven. In fact, as we read last week, Paul says, not that I have already attained. He's Paul. He's writing the scriptures. He says, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm still pressing on. And so as Christians, we're calling others to walk along with us. We haven't already arrived. We're not super Christians. We're not so holy that nobody can even associate with us. No. What did Jesus do? He emptied himself of all of that glory and all that stuff, and he came and became obedient to death and became like a servant. And we're supposed to have this mind in us that was also in Jesus who did those things. And so David, kind of being somebody who was in a difficult circumstance, allowed others to identify with him. A good friend of mine who's now with the Lord, his name's Kim Buttram, he got cancer, and he was in the hospital, and it wasn't looking good, and he was just in for a long time, and he talked to me one day about how he got to walk with each one of his kids around the hospital. They did a lap, and he had 5 kids, and he did a lap with each kid. And he's like, I got to have that kind of conversation with each one because he didn't know if he was going to make it. He ended up living a long time after that. But he told me, he said, I learned when I was in the hospital that people will admire you for your strength, but they will identify with you in your weakness. And he said, I found that at church, people admired him for his strength, but in the hospital, they identified with him in his weakness. And he had so many greater conversations with people about faith in the hospital when he was weak than he did in the pulpit when he was strong. He said, then he followed with this. He said, you have to ask yourself, do you want to be admired or do you want to be identified with? That's the big question. So what did Paul say about that? Paul said, I will boast in my weakness. That's the thing. Instead of putting my strengths out front, I'm going to put my weakness out front. Thirdly, Saul was all about self, gave little thought for the pain and suffering he brought to others. Talks about this in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Paul is writing to Timothy, and he says, Timothy, in the last days, perilous times will come. And the way that perilous times would come, it says, people will be lovers of self. And then it lists all of these ways they're going to treat everybody else badly because they're lovers of self. We might be living in the last times. Saul was so self-centered. And he never even thought about all the damage he was doing all around him, the chaos he was bringing to the world. And Paul tells Timothy, that's how it's going to be at the end. It's going to get worse. Fourthly, Doeg's opportunistic loyalty to the mad king ended up making him into one of the greatest villains of the Old Testament. He was just taking a shot to see if he could jump up a rung. I mean, he was probably a great official in Moab who had been spared by Saul when Saul conquered Moab, but now he was in charge of the shepherds and the sheep and stuff like that. And this is a chance for him to kind of move into the inner circle, move up past all the other people. So he offers this information. He demonstrates loyalty to the Mad King, but then what happens? If the Mad King thinks you're loyal, he's going to ask you to do bad things. And then Doeg was put in this terrible situation. And I would just say, I think there's a caution there because there's a lot of mad kings in this world. Some of you work for a mad king, or there's a lot of people in high places that are crazy. And be careful about how much loyalty you're willing to swear to anyone, any allegiance other than Christ. Doeg's loyalty to the mad king made him one of the greatest villains in the Old Testament. Lastly, David rightfully took responsibility for the victim, but wrongfully took the guilt for Saul's sin. And there's a very important distinction there. It was fine for David to say, hey, because your father and in his household was implicated with me, I want to take care of you now, and I'm going to protect you for all of my days. That was an honorable and very fine thing for David to say. What's wrong for David to do is to take the guilt and the shame. It was Saul's sin that killed this man's father. It wasn't David's. That was Saul's problem. And I think there's this tendency in our minds. Sometimes we take on the guilt and the shame of somebody else's sin. They have to answer to God for their stuff. We can take responsibility, we can help a person, but we can't take on the guilt and the shame of someone else's sin. That's theirs to deal with God. See, Jesus takes both, doesn't he, at the cross? The one who knew no sin became sin for us. He took on the shame and the guilt as well as the sin. He took it all on. But you and I, we're not the perfect Son of God sacrificing for mankind. So it's right to take responsibility and help others. It's wrong to take on the shame and the guilt of someone else's sin. And I'm sure that can be applied in many areas across the board. Father, I pray that you'll help us to learn from this difficult passage whatever your Spirit wants us to bring from it, whatever you want to apply to our lives. Lord, help us to follow you with great diligence, to love you with everything we've got. Lord, I pray that as we follow you as your disciples, that we would walk in the confidence of being yours, of having your authority, and that you would spare us from deceitfulness, from foolishness, in responding out of fear. Lord, I pray for those who have gone through difficult circumstances, and maybe because of an implication or an association, someone else was hurt through the sin of another. So Lord, help us to be responsible and take care of folks that we could take care of, Lord, but let us not bear the burden of shame that is not ours to bear. And Lord, we thank you that Jesus has borne that ultimately, that all of our shame and all of our guilt is translated to Jesus at the cross. And we thank you for your great love. Help us to live wisely and behave wisely in a world that's gone crazy. In Jesus' name, amen.